Welcome to a masterclass at the Goode Intelligence Digital Trust World 2021. My name is Alan Goode and I'm the CEO and Chief Analyst at Goode Intelligence, and I shall be your host for today's masterclass. I'm joined today by Tony Allen, CEO of Age Check Certification Scheme. Tony is presenting on the approval by the ICO of a UK GDPR certification scheme for identity and age assurance, what that means for identity service providers, and how relying parties can start to specify certification and assurance in procurement tenders requests for proposals, how that will feed into the UK's Digital ID Trust framework and the development of a worldwide interoperable identity framework. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm hopefully going to be able to put my slides up to share with you. There we go. So, my name is Tony Allen. I'm the Chief Executive of the Age Check Certification Scheme. My background is in training standards and in particular age-restricted goods, services and content, and looking at the processes and systems that need to be put in place to protect children from harm from access to those age-restricted goods, content and services. And what I've been asked to do today is to talk about where this is all going, and in particular to talk about how we have been working to develop the world's first fully accredited certification scheme for the process of identity and age verification services, and how that then fits into trust frameworks, and how that fits into GDPR, and how that fits into enabling you to be able to demonstrate to relying parties or to governments, regulators, credit card providers, whoever it is, that you have an effective age verification and identity verification system in place. So I'm going to cover how the pilot certification schemes for the trust framework are developing and working, about age and identity assurance components and the standards relating to that. A bit about the accreditation process and what's involved in that. Approaches to the determination of audit effort. That's effectively how audit companies will work out how long it takes to carry out an audit and what will be involved in that audit. And then how we look at research into identity and biometric assurance for the future. So I'm going to start with who we are. So we are the Age Check Certification Scheme. We test that ID and age check systems work, and that's all that we do. We do not provide ID systems. We don't provide age verification systems. We're independent of the industry. We are here to test and check that these systems actually work. And we do that within our accredited, we are an accredited conformity assessment body by UCAS in the UK, but that covers worldwide services and accreditation. We're also the world's first approved certification scheme by the Information Commissioner's Office under GDPR. So there were specific provisions in GDPR under Article 42 for certification schemes to be approved, and we are the first to be approved. And they have approved two schemes. One relates to the data protection and privacy for running ID and age check systems. And then the other one, very interestingly, relates to the provision of age-appropriate design on individual websites. So that's like social media, gambling, gaming, education technology, various other sectors that have to deliver age-appropriate content online. So we've got a second certification scheme that covers that. So just trying to break this all down into what do we mean by age and identity assurance. Well, they are two separate things, and we treat them in different ways, in two separate ways. So age assurance is about being able to demonstrate to a relying party that a person is or is not over or under or between a certain age group. So they're over 18, for instance, to be able to access a gambling site, or they're over 13 to be able to sign up to marketing on social media, or they're over 60 to be able to access a bus pass, or they're between the ages of 25 and 30 if they've got particular insurance criteria around going on holiday or stuff like that. It doesn't really matter what the age gateway is. They are about giving an answer to that question. They're not about sharing your identity. They're not necessarily about even keeping identity. There are techniques used in age assurance that are nothing to do with actually identifying who the individual person is, and we'll talk a bit more about that. And then secondly, you have identity assurance, and this is about saying, are you who you say you are? I am me, my name is Tony, you don't know me, you've got no idea who I am, I've got no idea who you are either, because I can't see through this computer as to who you might be. How do you know that I am me, and how do you know that I am Tony? Well, you have recently, at the start of this, received from Alan, somebody you may know and you may trust, attestation that I am Tony. And that is part of you starting to build up identity assurance about me. Now, that might be enough for you. You might be quite happy to accept what Alan tells you and believe that I am Tony. You might be quite happy with me just saying I am Tony. But if I was opening a bank account, or if I was trying to buy a mortgage, or I was trying to do a high value transaction, you would probably want to know a bit more about me. And that's where identity assurance comes in, and you build up that identity assurance through various different levels of understanding what documents or what evidence or what support or how long your identity has existed over time. These are both underpinned by two critical factors when it comes to trust frameworks. The first is privacy and data protection. And in the UK, we have the Information Commissioner's Office. Across the European Union, we've got lead commissioners, and we work particularly with the Irish Data Protection Commissioner. And we've got international standards, although the standards are not quite as strong as the GDPR requirements are in the European Union. And the second thing that underpins this is management systems, how you control and manage your business to provide that identity and age assurance. And that's looking at things like quality management systems, information security management systems, and risk management systems. And all of that collective picture there really gives you the scope of what we do as a certification scheme. Now we're going to break this down. We're going to break it down into some quite detailed levels as we talk about this, so you get a real good flavour for the breadth of all of the age assurance and identity assurance components. And we break them down into the different components that I've just described on the previous slide, first of all. But then within those subgroups, we are looking at what's within that, what the relevant standards are applicable to that. And you'll see there are quite a lot of gaps there. How we've interpreted those into creating technical requirements. And then we look at how the methodology for how you assess that is undertaken. So we start with a set of general scheme rules. And we call those ACCS 0. So that's our core set of rules that apply to all of our certification clients. We then look at age verification systems, and there aren't currently any international standards on age verification. There is a piece of work going on at the moment, which I chair, which is called ISO PWI 7732, which is looking at creating an international standard for age verification systems. That is looking at using evaluation criteria under ISO 15408, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that in a little bit. There is also currently a code of practice called PAS 1296, which was developed by the British Standards Institution, and we've drawn that lot together into something which we've got ACCS 4. Age estimation system. So this is where you're not trying to verify using a identity document or using some kind of hard verifier, but you're simply using biometrics. You might be looking at face, hand geometry, neuro-linguistics, whatever it may be. Again, no international standard for that, and no code of practice for that either. There's no really understood methods or trust frameworks or approaches to how you do those kind of systems. And so we've had to write one, which is the ACCS 1 there, about how you would actually evaluate those systems and how they would work. I'm going to come back to the bit on the end there about the EAL levels at the end of the presentation. Then we're getting into some really cutting edge aspects and developments where you start looking at parental consent and social proofing. Now, the GDPR, articulated GDPR, is very clear about being able to process children's data on the basis of consent requires their parents to consent if they're under a certain age, which is, depending on where you are in Europe, differs, but is between 13 and 16. And social proofing is the concept that you can get your friends to attest to how old you are, based on who's attested to how old they are, and that link and that network. It's all very developmental, and is currently going in a project called the EU Consent Project that I am the Deputy Programme Director for, and is happening across the European Union, funded by the European Union at the moment. And then in the UK, you have something called the Proof of Age Standard Scheme. This has actually been around for 20 odd years. Some of you, if you're in the UK, may have had little ID cards like a citizen card or a Young Scot card. And that scheme still exists and is currently developing a standard in relation to the digital presentation of proof of age, which we are also the auditors for that scheme and those standards. So that kind of describes in a high level age assurance. We're going to delve more into that. For identity assurance, well, you have the general rules again, they apply to everybody, and there is actually a code of practice on a general approach to identity systems, which actually has only been out for a few months, but is called BS 8626, developed by BSI. Does provide that, that kind of overview of how you approach doing identity assurance systems. Then we've got governments, and then in digital ID trust frameworks, there is an alpha version of the trust framework for the DCMS in the UK. That's the UK government department responsible for digital services. But there are similar things in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa. There's a lot of governments around the world looking at this concept of trust frameworks, but they're all very, very new. You then have things like the electronic ID validation technology. And so you have things like GPG 45, which is again a guidance note or a code of practice. And you have things like the FIDO Alliance work on document authenticity, which we have taken a leading part on and are currently working on being one of the pilot test centers for that document authenticity. You know, you start to now get into things that have existed for quite a long period of time in the identity assurance world, such as biometrics, fingerprint recognition, facial recognition, and there are starting to now be some standards out there, international standards about how you test and assess those biometric systems and how you make sure that they're not subject to spoofing attack. So how you know, for instance, if you've got a biometric system that is looking for a face, how you make sure it hasn't got a mask, or it isn't a deep fake, or it isn't a you know, picture of a goat, or someone trying to spoof it. And in the international standards world, that's called presentation attack detection. And then there's also stuff in there in relation to vulnerability, penetration testing. We don't tend to get involved too much in the OWASP type stuff. But that is part and parcel of that identity assurance world. Within the privacy and data protection sphere, we have the age-appropriate design code in the UK. It's also being looked at very closely across Europe. And this effectively sets out how you comply with GDPR if you are processing children's data. And we have got ISO approval for that code. We don't have ISO approval for UK GDPR in general for identity and age assurance service providers. Looking at potentially working on an EU privacy seal covering the whole of the European Union. The EU's a few years behind with that than the UK was, and hasn't yet really got any specialist seals in privacy seals in this area. There are some generic ones, and there are some that are exploring in other areas, but nothing particular in this area as yet. And then, of course, you have the privacy management systems, part of the management suite that goes with the 27000 series. And speaking of those management suites, you've got quality management systems, information security management systems, and you've got risk management systems. The risk management system is an interesting one because that's a code of practice and not a standard, but it still covers some important information in there about how you assess risk. Looking at the applicable methods of how you work out how to audit that, what the audit effort is and cost. And I'm going to delve into this in some more depth. But you've got, first of all, relatively static. So these are often fixed costs or fixed approaches. You have ones that are based on, broadly speaking, the company size. So the bigger the company, the more audit is required, covering the range of activities within that company. And then you have ones that are built on the common criteria, or ISO 15408, which is the evaluation assurance levels. And I'll show you a bit more about that a bit further on. So that kind of overview there starts to unpick what is within these identity and age assurance services. Now, I'm going to unpick them a little bit further and look at what the individual components are. So going back to age verification systems, there are 7 or 8 increasing numbers of methods. So you've got things like mobile phone lookup, driving license data, bank data, credit reference data, passports, immigration documents, other government documents, other things that might be accredited locally, like the pass cards are in the UK. There may be open banking information. In some countries there have got quite advanced single identity systems and banking systems. All of those individually are assurance components, and when we look at systems, we test whether those assurance components actually work. So, you know, if someone says we can look up to see if you are registered to vote, we'll see that their system is developed to do that in the right way and has got the right protocols in place. Age estimation systems are rapidly evolving and advancing. So you have face analysis, and so we can look at facial analysis both from the point of view of, if it looks at me and says that I'm clearly not yet 21, then its efficacy isn't that great. But we also look at it from the point of view of gender and skin tone bias, because of issues around the way that the face analysis works. There can be issues around bias inherent within the system, both from a training point of view of the training data that's used for that, but also from a natural physics point of view in relation to the properties of light. There's also emerging technologies out there, such as hand geometry. So that's the size of your pinch gesture, how wide your fingers are, and which of course is data minimized and anonymous, but useful within gaming or within sites. Things like cognitive ability, you'll sometimes see this referred to as NLP or textual analysis, or sentence structure analysis, or all sorts of things that sort of fit within that. And that's based on the principle that as you get older, you learn more words, you learn more about the structure of sentences, and you learn more about grammar and things like that. And therefore, you can assess or estimate people's age based on their cognitive abilities and stuff like that. We also check out different ambient lighting, because if you're in a dark nightclub, you've got less ability to capture data and facial analysis than if you were in a bright retail shop setting. I mentioned already the parental consent and social proofing, and that's that piece of work which we're currently leading through the European Union on the EU consent programme. And the proof-based standard scheme is looking at card issuers, accredited digital proof of age issuers, electronic ID verification technology providers, and digital proof of age interoperability providers, all very snappy title, but basically make that whole proof of age standards system work and operate. And the car production services. So the groups in relation to identity assurance, well, you've got these digital ID trust frameworks, and these talk about identity service providers, attribute service providers, orchestration service providers, and relying parties. And in the UK, the DCMS are doing a lot of work on this. Very recently, only a few weeks ago, they published a revised version of their alpha. They've also published the requirements for certification schemes, and we will be one of the accredited certification schemes underneath that digital ID trust framework. When you look at electronic ID validation technologies, you have remote ID validation technology. So this is where I am showing my driving license or my passport to a camera on my phone or a web camera or to a PC. And it's done remotely. So the system is detached from the where the person is. But you also have connected scanner ID document authentication. This is like when you cross a border and there is a housed scanner that you put your passport on, and it's reading the passport and the data that's on the biometric chips. That's a connected document authentication. Then you've got the process of document data extraction, because not only do you have the document authentication bit, making sure that it's a genuine document, but you've got to be able to have a system that can extract that data and use it in a way that it can be interoperable. Often government documents, particularly when you look at government documents in the US versus the versus European Union, have the dates all mixed up. The US typically goes month, date, year, whereas in the European Union it typically goes day, month, year. And if you haven't set up your system properly, then that data extraction can get confused, and you can very easily have a situation where somebody appears to be over 18 when they're not over 18, and therefore cause problems down the line. With biometrics, you've got the face image data interchange, you've got fingerprint, you've got finger vein, you've got hand geometry, you've got all sorts of things around gait, footsteps, loads of things going on there. With presentation attack detection, you've got the face image presentation attack, you've got fingerprint, finger vein, hand geometry again. You've also then got ID documents, using false and fake documents, which is very difficult to test systems for. You've got age assurance systems and the presentation attack associated with those. And then you've got these digital ID systems that we described above about how you might be able to attack those at a system level. All of that lot there, we've just spoken about, is what we're working on the ISO 17025 accredited laboratory, which will be the first accredited laboratory in the UK to do this, and one of the first in the world to do a lot of these things. There are a couple of the laboratories that are doing some of the more established things already, but bringing it all together into one is a bit of a world first. Then we look at the management components. Well, we've got the ICO approval for our schemes. We're the only approved schemes for the under the ICO, and the only approved schemes anywhere across the European Union for GDPR, so a bit of a first there. We've got the EU GDPR work, which we're doing with the, hopefully taking forward the Irish Data Protection Commissioner, and then we've also got the existing 27001 accreditation process. And on the systems management, this is all fairly familiar to people, the existing systems management side of things. Our scheme rules cover the whole of the operation of our scheme. So how do we go about determining the audit effort required to look at these individual systems? And there are broadly two ways we do that: through a company complexity approach or through the evaluation assurance levels. And so looking first of all at company complexity, this is based broadly on International Accreditation Forum's Mandatory Document 5, which looks at things like how many people there are in that organization, how many locations that organization operates across, and how complex the client's systems are. But then mitigates that against an analysis of the risk, so lower risk organizations don't require as much. Analysis of the complexity. We always say to clients that very much the easiest way to comply with GDPR is not to keep any data, and that makes it much easier to meet the requirements. And then multiple component combinations. So if you were doing ISO 9001 plus 27001 plus the digital trust framework, you can combine those together to reduce the cost by doing things in one go. This shows the relationship between complexity and the audit time. So if you've got a large multi-site but relatively small scope of complexity versus a large multi-site that across a range of things, small scope, repetitive processes, small and simple versus many processes, etc. So broadly speaking, the further you are to the left and the bottom, the cheaper an audit process is, and the further you are to the right and the top, the more expensive it is. It's broken into stages. So stage 0 is typically pre-audit, where we are looking at sort of gap analysis, trying to work out if you're ready for an audit, whether you've actually got a documented system and what preparation is needed for your audit. Then we'll go into stage 1, which is information gathering and awareness. So finding out about your business, how it's structured, how it's organized, how it's led, where the system is and what documents you've got. And then stage 3 is the conformity assessment. Does the system protect? Does the system, product, process or service conform to the requirements of the relevant standard or standards where they are? Or where there aren't standards, does it conform to what you say it is? So just because there isn't an international standard, we can still certify and test against what you claim it can do as part of the overall process. And then that leads to the normal certification cycle. We would complete that initial certification. It goes on to a public register, which is on our website. It would then be subject to monitoring and surveillance and dealing with any complaints about your system that came through to us. And then there's a recertification, and that cycle continues. So for those that are based on company complexity, like 9001, 27001, like some of the things in relation to GDPR and data protection, this is the approach that we take to how we determine how many audit days are required. There is no one size fits all. And for those that are looking at the evaluation assurance levels, so this is used where you are looking at a specific assurance component. So which aspects of your identity and age assurance management system you are examining. For instance, looking up a driving license, or capturing a driving license, or doing an age estimation, or looking at a hand geometry. They're what we call assurance components. And we use ISO 15408 for this, which is the common criteria. So any of you that are involved in IT security, any of the testing of IT security components, this will be entirely familiar to you, because this is exactly the same thing that is used for those components. But this looks at 3 aspects that are done by the client: the coverage of testing, the depth of testing, and the functional testing undertaken by the client. And then the independent testing undertaken by us. And then we look at how long that's going to take and what kind of levels of activity are involved in that. And I'm going to give some plain English descriptors of this. So first of all, EAL level 1 is, does it work? So at this point, we're not really interested in what testing you've done or what's gone into the preparation for this. We're just going to put it through some simple conformance testing, usually around about 30 presentation attempts. And then we will report back to you on whether broadly it looks like it works. And this is used for initial testing. We have quite a number of companies that will put their system through this so they can understand how the testing works, independent testing works in broad terms, but so they can get a feel for where it is. And there might be a couple of audit days of activity to achieve that. EAL level 2 then starts to engage in the evidence of your test coverage and the functional testing that you've underdone, backed up by some testing carried out by us to a relatively higher level. Using the rule of 3, we do around about 300 presentations for these. And this is about, have you tested it and is it working as verified by us? broadly speaking, if you're selling your product into the marketplace, that's usually acceptable, that kind of level of testing for them to buy a product from you that would work and be satisfactory from their point of view. From here on, we get more and more scientific. We get more and more into the depth of stuff. So EAL level 3 is where we're now looking at not only your testing, but we're also reviewing the design of your testing and the testing you've undertaken, and carrying out independent testing and analysis. And then EAL level 4 is the same thing again, but with a much higher level of testing. We might be looking at sort of 3,000 or so presentations at this point to test and properly assess the systems. EAL level 5 is then getting into much more analysis of the modular design of the test approach and the functions, and giving some assurance about how that system has been built. If you are looking at selling your business to an investor, and you're sort of talking about multi-million-pound investment opportunities, an investor is probably going to be looking for something around that EAL level 5 in their due diligence of their assessment of your system. We then get into the academia world, where you're looking at very in-depth function and ordered function testing, a rigorous analysis of the test coverage. And by the time you get to EAL level 7, you're looking at academic white papers, PhD kind of level assessments of things, and that's obviously something you might need if you were into the research community, or you were doing papers for Parliament, or things you want to publish in relation to your evaluation assurance. So that's given you a run through of all of the components, the assurance components, how the certification scheme is structured. I hope that's been a useful session for you. Really would like to welcome contacts and questions. My contact details are all on screen there. But over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Tony. That was very informative and on such an important topics and a range of topics there. So yeah, if you want to get hold of or ask questions to Tony, there's the details there. And I'm sure he can come back to you with any questions that you do have. So I'd like to thank our audience today for tuning in, and wish the best for the remainder of the day. Thank you very much.